In a small village surrounded by rolling hills, there lived a woman named Clara. She was a talented baker, known for her delicious pastries and warm, fragrant loaves of bread. The joy she found in baking was reflected in the smiles of the villagers who visited her bakery each day. Yet, despite her success and the love she had for her craft, Clara found herself growing increasingly unhappy. The once vibrant village had become a place of negativity due to economic hardships, rising costs, and widespread discontent. Conversations were filled with complaints and worries. Clara struggled to stay positive, but the constant negativity around her took its toll. Her bakery, once a hub of warmth and joy, felt heavy. Clara noticed she wasn't smiling as much when greeting customers and felt a change in her heart and work. One chilly morning, as Clara was preparing the day's batch of bread, her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Carter, walked into the bakery. Mrs. Carter had lived in the village for decades and was known for her optimism. No matter the circumstances, she always seemed to find a way to stay cheerful. "Clara, dear," Mrs. Carter said, her eyes twinkling with kindness, "you look troubled. What's going on?" Clara sighed, wiping her hands on her apron. "It's the village, Mrs. Carter. Everywhere I go, it's complaints. People focus on what's wrong, forgetting what's right. I try to stay positive, but it's hard with all the negativity." Mrs. Carter smiled gently. "I understand, Clara. But let me share something with you. There's an old saying, a garden reflects the soul of its gardener. When a gardener takes care of their garden, it flourishes. But if the gardener neglects it or becomes too discouraged, the garden suffers." Clara looked at Mrs. Carter, unsure of what she meant. "I don't understand. What does that have to do with me?" Mrs. Carter placed a hand on Clara's shoulder. "Your bakery is like a garden, Clara. It reflects your state of mind. If you allow negativity to take root in your heart, it will show in everything you do. But if you choose to cultivate positivity, gratitude, hope, and kindness, your spirit will flourish, and so will your work." Clara stood in silence, thinking deeply about Mrs. Carter's words. It was true. She had allowed the negativity around her to affect her own thoughts and emotions. "But how do I change it?" Clara asked. "How can I replace all this negativity with something more positive?" Mrs. Carter smiled warmly. "It begins with small steps. Every day, choose to focus on something good, something you're grateful for. Start each morning with a positive thought, and let it grow from there." Clara listened carefully, her heart lifting with hope. She had been so focused on the negativity around her that she had forgotten the power of her own thoughts. It wasn't going to be easy, but she was determined to try. The very next morning, Clara woke up early and stood at the window of her bakery, watching the sun rise over the village. She decided to start each day with gratitude. Over the next few weeks, Clara made small changes. Every morning she reflected on what she was grateful for before starting her work. She smiled at her customers, even when they complained. As Clara practiced gratitude and optimism, she noticed a shift within herself. The heaviness in her heart lifted, and she smiled more, even during difficult times. Baking became an act of love again. Her dough rose with lightness, and her bread had the airy texture that customers loved. The bakery felt brighter and more inviting. The energy in the shop shifted, and the villagers quickly noticed. At first, they were curious. They couldn't help but wonder what had changed in Clara. Why was she smiling more? Why was her bakery so full of life? As they visited her shop, they found themselves drawn to her positivity. They began to ask her how she had managed to change her outlook. Clara simply smiled and said, "I've learned that if you want to change the world around you, You must first change the way you think. I focus on what I'm grateful for, and that makes all the difference. Soon, the villagers began to follow Clara's example. They started to focus on the positive aspects of their lives instead of the negative. The entire village began to shift as people focused more on gratitude, kindness, and hope. The negativity that had once taken hold of the village began to lose its grip. Clara's bakery flourished as well. The more positivity she cultivated in her own life, the more it spread to the village around her. Her customers returned not only for the delicious bread, but also for the uplifting energy that seemed to fill her shop. Clara had transformed her bakery, and in doing so, she had helped transform the entire village. Clara's story reminded everyone that positivity is contagious. By focusing on the good, we can transform our lives and the world around us. Like a garden, our hearts and minds can bloom with beauty and joy.